Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Fallon Forum. Now, just as a warning, you do not need to refresh your browser or adjust your monitor. Ed Fallon did not get a toupee. He is actually out of the country and has asked a few folks to guest host while he's out of town. He's taken his hat and his bike, I believe, to Ireland, and so I am fortunate enough to sit in as a guest host for a few days. My name is Matt Sinovic. I'm the Executive Director of Progress Iowa, and we've got a terrific show lined up for you today, featuring guests Lisa Graves, the Executive Director of the Center for Media and Democracy, Peter Fisher, the Research Director for the Iowa Policy Project, and State Senator Joe Bolcom from Iowa City, who's also the chair of the national organization, the Progressive States Network. We're going to be talking about ALEC today, the American Legislative Exchange Council. But before we get started, I especially want to thank our show sponsors, the Iowa chapter of the Sierra Club, Iowa Physicians for Social Responsibility, and the Great March for Climate Action. I also want to thank Maddie Kane, who's the producer here in studio, who's going to be helping me with all of the logistics as all of our guests are calling in today. But now let me introduce you to ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. You might have heard of them. You might have heard a little bit about some of their influence, and particularly their dangerous influence on Iowa public policy and public policy across the country. They're a group that the New York Times has called stealth lobbyists for their efforts to influence public policy at the state level, and they've done so. They're called stealth lobbyists because they operate in such secrecy and obscurity. They promote smaller government, corporate control of public policy, and really the privatization of every aspect of our lives. Our schools, our prisons, anything and everything to shift tax dollars to benefit their corporate sponsors. And in order to more effectively promote those policies, they want to limit your participation in the democratic process. Your participation, my participation, and the participation of anyone who disagrees with the agenda that they're promoting. That's also why they promote voter ID laws across the country, and again, do so with a shroud of secrecy. Now, maybe you think that's crazy. Maybe you think that no one in their right mind would want to limit someone's participation or right to vote or their engagement in the democratic process. We all grew up learning about good government and how the process should work, how a bill becomes a law with citizen engagement and people submitting ideas to their locally elected officials. But that's not how ALEC operates. And if you don't believe me, Maddie, if you'd cue up the video, if you don't believe me, hear it straight from the voice of their founder, Paul Weyrich.
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome, good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
That video of Paul Weyrich speaking in 1980, where he literally said, "I don't want everyone to vote," outlines one of the basic political principles of ALEC and the right wing, what ALEC and the right wing has pursued over the last 40 years. They want to limit our participation in democracy so that they can pursue their own agenda and shift public dollars to corporate profit holders. Paul Weyrich helped found ALEC 40 years ago in 1973. They just had their 40th anniversary. He also helped found the Heritage Foundation and coined the term moral majority. So whatever their issues or policies, and we'll get to those later with Peter Fisher, our guest from the Iowa Policy Project, whatever their policies may be, you should know that ALEC was founded with an extreme political agenda. Now, Ask yourself, why would they not want us to participate? Why would they want us to stay away from the political process? Well, think of how a bill becomes a law. When we were taught in school that we have three branches of government: the legislative, the judicial, and the executive. The legislative writes the laws, the executive signs and enforces the laws, and the judiciary rules on what laws are constitutional or not. So when our state legislators are supposed to be writing laws with citizen input and information gathered for the betterment of their community, ALEC completely cuts the public out of the process. ALEC has found a loophole, and it's a loophole big enough to drive a Mack truck through, by creating an organization where legislators and corporate lobbyists get to sit down and write laws together. They do so in complete secrecy, and then they get to vote side by side on what laws to promote. Legislators become ALEC members, and in Iowa, they actually use our tax dollars to pay their fees. Corporations also become members, paying tens of thousands of dollars a year for the right to vote in a task force that ALEC hosts. They get wined and dined at fancy meetings, and then they cast a vote. The lobbyists vote, then the legislators vote. And if they don't agree, then the bill doesn't go forward. So the language that has been worked out by lobbyists and legislators then gets taken back to our state house, and legislators pass it off as their own bill. If your state, and Iowa has done some of these things, if your state has passed privatized prisons, privatized public education, enacted voter ID laws, or passed laws to keep wages down, you might be an ALEC state. In fact, every state has had an ALEC bill introduced in their legislature. And not just over the 40 years since ALEC was founded, every state had an ALEC bill introduced this year. So why do they need ALEC? Why did Paul Weyrich and other conservative leaders found ALEC 40 years ago? Well, when ALEC was founded in 1973, conservatives had been losing battles in Washington for about 40 years. The New Deal increased regulation of banking and corporations to avoid another Great Depression. Medicaid, Medicare, expanded environmental laws, expanded voting rights with the Civil Rights Act, Social Security. All of these were defeats for conservatives. And when Weyrich and others knew they wanted the next 40 years to be different, they decided to take their battle to the states. They decided to try to enact state laws and policies that would benefit corporations and recruit a new crop of leaders who could be in place for a long time to come. Our own governor, Terry Branstad, was a founding member of ALEC as a state legislator, and now he works with them regularly. He spoke at their 40th annual meeting last month in Chicago, and he's received more than $200,000 in donations from ALEC member corporations. The controversial governor of Wisconsin, Scott Walker, also has close ties with ALEC, and there are more and more across the country. Another native of Wisconsin is with us right now, Lisa Graves, the executive director of the Center for Media and Democracy. She's done tremendous work exposing ALEC, and Lisa joins us now. Lisa, are you there?
Thank you so much, Matt. I'm an adopted daughter of Wisconsin, and I'm pleased to be here on your show.
Well, thanks for joining us. As you may have been listening in, we've been talking about ALEC and their role in state government. And it was actually your work and the work of Center for Media and Democracy that led to much of the exposure that ALEC has received. And as I've mentioned, they don't want any exposure. They want to keep operating in private. So will you take us through what happened, sort of how you came across the initial documentation, and then what happened when you released it?
Sure. In 2011, when there was tremendous controversy here in Wisconsin over some of the extreme bills being pushed by new governor Scott Walker, the talk on the street was that ALEC was involved, and people were wondering, who is this ALEC? It couldn't possibly be Alec Baldwin. What is this ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council? And we were writing about this agenda of Scott Walker, and a whistleblower contacted me with all of the bills that had been secretly voted on by corporate lobbyists and state lawmakers over the past 40 years. I was shocked, quite frankly. I'd been doing some research into ALEC. It was a nonprofit. It said that it didn't do any lobbying. It described itself as bipartisan. and a membership organization of lawmakers, what I discovered in our investigation was that 98% of ALEC's leaders are Republicans. I discovered that 98% of its revenue comes from sources other than legislators, sources such as corporations or foundations from some of the biggest corporate families in the country. And I also discovered that ALEC wasn't just promoting public policy, it was actually lobbying for those public policies in Iowa and other states while telling the IRS that it engaged in zero lobbying. And in fact, perhaps the most shocking thing I discovered in my investigation and the investigation of our team at the Center for Media Democracy was that, as you point out, corporations actually vote. So corporations were voting as equals with lawmakers in these secret closed-door meetings at fancy ALEC conventions at resorts across the country, where corporate lobbyists had an equal voice and vote with lawmakers and could veto what lawmakers wanted. And then the lawmakers in each state who were the leaders of ALEC were tasked with getting those bills introduced and passed, and they did.
Well, Lisa, you said corporations can vote, but what's wrong with that? I mean, as they tell us, corporations are people too.
Well, corporations voting on bills, sort of pre-voting on bills before the legislature gets a chance to, I think is quite extraordinary and highly unusual, and I would describe it as undemocratic. Some of these corporations are foreign corporations like Takeda Pharmaceuticals out of Japan, or they're foreign-dominated corporations like BP, which has U.S. interests but also has huge global interests. And so they're not necessarily your local corporation at all. But even if they were your local corporation, in a democracy, our elected representatives are supposed to represent the people in their district, the people in their state. They're not elected to represent foreign interests or out-of-state interests whose agendas are not the same as ours. And in fact, you can see that what's happening in, for instance, the school privatization issue, where a corporation called K-12, which is traded on the Wall Street Stock Exchange and which is a so-called virtual school company, gets 98% of its revenue from Americans' tax dollars. And it turns around and pays its CEO nearly $500,000 a year and nearly $20 million in stock options that he's accumulated from this company, or stock and stock options. And yet ALEC and its brethren have been saying teachers are paid too much. So they're siphoning money out of our public schools to fund huge salaries and perks for executives at the for-profit school companies that fund ALEC.
Well, that is pretty shocking. And you said that when you first discovered these documents or were presented with them, that you were shocked about the level and depth at which ALEC operates. Could you just give us what you found, like one example of the most shocking incident at a state level?
Oh my goodness, there are so many, but one that we saw they attempted to move last year was a bill to bar American families from suing drug companies and medical device companies if the drug that they had been prescribed was approved by the FDA. And so basically in the United States, every drug is approved by the FDA, either for over-the-counter or for prescription drug sales. And so what ALEC wanted to do was say that if your mother, your sister, your son were killed or injured by a drug in this country, you would be barred from suing unless you could prove somehow that the company had committed fraud. It's extraordinary, especially in this country where we've had so many drug recalls because drugs have been approved through a sort of the revolving door FDA process where corporations are so involved in the FDA, it's corrupted the process, and where the FDA drug process relies on the corporation's own tests to say that the drugs are safe all too often. And numerous Americans have been killed or injured as a result of drugs that were brought to the market too soon. And now ALEC, in order to pad the pockets of its pharmaceutical companies that fund it, wants to say that you cannot sue a drug company if your loved one dies as a result of a defective drug. It's shocking, and it's morally offensive, quite frankly.
So what you're telling us is that ALEC is not only pursuing these changes in the legislative branch, but they're attempting to sort of infect our public policy in the judicial branch and in really all facets of government.
That's right. In fact, they have a huge agenda to basically take away the power of juries, to take away the powers of juries in Iowa and other states so that a jury of your peers cannot hear a case like that, can't sit in judgment the way our Constitution specifies that we have a right to a civil trial in this country in a civil case if we're injured or otherwise. What these ALEC companies want to do is take away that right. They say that those cases should basically be predetermined by your legislatures, who aren't listening to the individual cases of harm, but who are listening to these pharmaceutical companies who have their ear at these fancy resort meetings where they go and where they're wined and dined by ALEC corporations, including big drug companies, in order to push their agenda, an agenda that directly harms you.
Well, we're talking with Lisa Graves, the executive director of the Center for Media and Democracy, and after a quick commercial break, we'll get into it with Lisa about the exposure that ALEC has received, the criticism that they've been subjected to, and some recent news, some good news actually, about diminishing ALEC's influence. But first, thanks to Gateway Market for sponsoring this segment of the show. Gateway Market and Cafe, located at 20th and Woodland in the Sherman Hill District, provides lots of fresh groceries from Iowa farms and local producers and keeps their money in the local economy. Gateway Market creates memorable food experiences by offering an abundant selection of natural, organic, and specialty foods from around the world. They serve the central Iowa community by providing locally made, handcrafted products in a welcoming, customer-centered environment that encourages learning and honors the simple pleasures of the table. Stop in today for a delicious breakfast, lunch, or dinner, a favorite local spot. And thanks to Hawk Restaurant, experience healthy, local, delicious, sustainable, farm-to-table dining in the historic East Village of Des Moines, serving lunch, dinner, and brunch on Sundays, all while eating in season. And lastly, thanks to Fighting Burrito in Ames and in downtown Des Moines, a great green place to have lunch. Healthy, delicious, and quick. Stop in today, or you can also order online. And again, thanks to Gateway Market for sponsoring this segment of the show.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Drug and alcohol addiction slowly steals a person's identity, tearing away pieces of their life little by little until one day it seems like the hope of a happy future is gone and there's no chance of getting it back. Here at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, we can assure you that there is hope. Our unique approach to recovery begins with the understanding that the dysfunction and damage caused by addiction can be overcome, not just dealt with. Don't let another day go by. Call St. Gregory today.
Well, good morning. This is the 7th of June in the Lord's year 2010, and this is day 1 of webcast1live.com. We will begin with Max World Live with my special guest, Tom Coates. In just a minute, there's Tom. Wait. Howdy. And we will be live for the very first time on Webcast One Live. Someday we're going to look back on this and say, gosh, remember that old day in history? Wonder where Walter Cronkite was. He must have been around hanging there too. But actually, it's the beginning of Webcast One Live. And thank you for listening. Thanks, Rob Spearman, and everybody who's put together this project together. And we're ready to go live now. So thanks for listening to MaxWorldLive.com.
I can't tell you that it's going real well from time to time, but it is going.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
We're back on the Fallon Forum. My name is Matt Sinovic, the Executive Director of Progress Iowa, guest hosting while Ed is traveling around the world. He's taken his bike and his hat and has gone to Ireland. We're talking about ALEC today, the American Legislative Exchange Council. Up next will be Peter Fisher, the Research Director of the Iowa Policy Project, followed by State Senator Joe Bolcom, who's also the chair of the Progressive States Network. But we've been talking with Lisa Graves, the executive director of the Center for Media and Democracy, who I believe is still with us. Lisa,
yes, I am.
Great. Lisa, we've been talking about the negative influence of ALEC and their sort of disastrous policies at the state level. But they've gotten some exposure in the last couple of years thanks to your hard work and the hard work of many others. And last week we had some big news with ALEC losing another corporate sponsor, Sallie Mae. Is that how many is that now that they've lost?
Well, that's a good question. We've been tracking it on our site, alecexposed.org, and writing about it on our PR Watch site. And there are two answers to that question. One is that as of our count, at least 50 corporations have announced in the past year that they have stopped funding ALEC, and 6 nonprofits have stopped. Those for-profit companies include Sallie Mae, the student loan company that was originally started by the government, but also companies like General Motors and General Electric and even Walmart have left ALEC. But we know through other investigative work that ALEC has lost more corporations than those. We know that fewer corporations are sponsoring its events, including the event in Chicago, or at least they don't want their name associated with it because ALEC has become so controversial because its bills have such a devastating impact on Americans.
Now, what led to that controversy, or what? I remember it was last spring. It was after the Trayvon Martin shooting is when it certainly picked up. I know that your initial research was released in 2011, which helped lay the groundwork for that. Sort of when the opportunity or when that event happened. Could you walk us through how that played out and who all participated in that effort?
Sure. So I have to say, as a person who was shocked by seeing the ALEC bill portfolio, I'm not someone who's naive. I've been around Washington. I've served as a senior leader in all 3 branches of the federal government, including as Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and I've been a lobbyist. And so I've seen what it looks like to make sausages in Washington. But I had never seen an organization like ALEC where corporations weren't just trying to influence lawmakers, they were actually voting with them. And so what we decided to do was launch alecexposed.org to provide descriptions of all of these pieces of legislation, to list all of the lawmakers who were part of ALEC, and to list all the corporations that we could identify that were funding ALEC so people could start connecting the dots. So last year, in the early part of the year, when news broke out that a young man named Trayvon Martin had been shot and killed by George Zimmerman and that his killer was not going to be arrested or tried, we knew that was the so-called Stand Your Ground legislation, and we knew immediately that was a bill that had been ratified by ALEC. So overnight, I worked to document that, to show how that bill was proposed in 2005 by the NRA's lobbyist through 2 ALEC members. It then was taken by the NRA to a closed-door meeting, a secret meeting in Texas, where corporations and politicians voted as equals to make that bill a national model. That meeting was of the ALEC Criminal Justice Task Force that was then co-chaired by Walmart. Other corporations on that or trade groups on that task force included Corrections Corporation of America and also the National Rifle Association. We know and we documented how ALEC for 5 years bragged about how it was pushing this bill into law. It was formerly known as the Castle Doctrine then, but it's more widely known as the Stand Your Ground Law. And that bill not only would have the effect of barring prosecution of someone who claims self-defense so that a jury can't consider the facts, it also changes the rule for justifiable homicide so that a person has a right to, quote, stand his ground and no duty to retreat in a public setting, at a bar or a sporting event or what have you, and could shoot to kill in essence, even if the person was unarmed, as we've seen in numerous instances that we've documented. Plus, that bill contains a highly immoral provision, which says that if the shooting victim's family sues the shooter and immunity is granted to the shooter, the shooting victim's family, the murder victim's family, has to pay the shooter's or the killer's attorney's fees and lost wages. And so we documented that for the national news media. There have been a number of stories about ALEC coming out of our launch of ALEC Exposed. But when the news media realized that ALEC was behind the push for Stand Your Ground in more than 24 states in this country, as well as the push to make it harder for Americans to vote through so-called restrictive voter ID policies and other policies, the national media began paying attention.
So ALEC may not have written that law, but through their network and their their ability to, behind the scenes, influence public policy in state houses across the country. They were able to promote it and enact it after the lobbyists and legislators, as you said, voted as equals to make it a model ALEC bill.
Well, that's right. And this is interesting because the NRA is one of the richest and most influential public interest groups or nonprofit groups in the country. It literally has hundreds of millions of dollars in its treasury. But the NRA went to ALEC to get this bill proliferated. So it's a case study of how ALEC operates. What ALEC does is provide these templates of legislation, this cookie-cutter legislation, to lawmakers in every state in the country. It's sort of one-stop shopping for corporate lobbyists. Their return on investment for corporations is enormous. They pay so little in terms of a couple thousand dollars or perhaps $100,000 to get this kind of access at these vacation-like meetings with ALEC legislators. And then these ALEC legislators come back and introduce the bills, cleansed of any reference to the fact that they were pre-voted on by corporations. And so you have to understand that ALEC is enormously influential in each state because its network of state lawmakers are going on these trips up to 3 times a year, hanging out with these lobbyists, being wined and dined by them at these resorts, and being handed bills that are prepackaged to be pushed through the legislature. And that's exactly what the ALEC lawmakers did.
So ALEC, even more powerful than the NRA, which may be a great tagline for them, but should be terrifying to the rest of us.
Well, that's right, because the NRA, which has lobbyists in every state, pardon me, chose ALEC to push its bills because ALEC is the epicenter for the promulgation of corporate bills that are backed by some of the biggest corporations in the world.
So, Lisa, what's next for CMD? You mentioned alecexposed.org, prwatch.org, which is the Center for Media and Democracy website. And I should also mention to everyone listening that all of the information that we're referencing on this show is available at progressiowa.org. There's a link there that says, "Have you met ALEC?" And if you click on that, you'll have links and videos for everything that we're referencing in today's show, including the Center for Media and Democracy's website. But Lisa, what's next for the Center for Media and Democracy? Are you going to continue taking on ALEC? I saw that you were featured in a trailer for a documentary about public education called Go Public or Going Public. So tell us what's next for you.
Well, sure, and we're continuing to shine a light on ALEC and these corporations that are funding ALEC. And ALEC has tried to distance itself from its gun legacy by disavowing those bills, but it hasn't done anything to try to get those bills repealed. And so we've continued to shine a light on that. But also, a lot of the work we do helps expose other parts of the ALEC agenda. So one thing that might be of interest to Iowans is that ALEC wants to preempt local control so that local counties and boards can't do something about a factory farm or an energy company, a power plant that wants to locate in your backyard, that all those matters would be handled by the state, and the states are largely captured by ALEC and ALEC corporations. And so this preemption of local democracy and local control is enormously dangerous and damaging. And so we're also working on exposing other aspects of the privatization agenda. And as you mentioned, I'm one of the speakers in a film called Going Public, which is trying to raise funds. It's a documentary to really help expose the story of ALEC corporations and other corporations that want to eliminate public education. One of the things that perhaps would be surprising to your listeners is that Milton Friedman, the economist beloved by so many people on the right, has openly said he wants to kill public education. He doesn't believe there should be public schools. And so ALEC has numerous bills to try to eliminate public schools step by step, brick by brick. And that's partly what that documentary is about. And so we'll be launching, we're launching this next week, a big push on telling people more about the privatization agenda of ALEC and other corporations and trying to help people learn more about who is pushing the policies that are basically undermining the American dream and their future.
Well, thank you so much for your work exposing ALEC and shining a light on issues and practices that they would rather have kept in the dark. I can't thank you enough for all you've done and for appearing on the show today, Lisa.
Well, thanks, Matt. And I do encourage all of your listeners to go to the to your Progress site and look at the great Iowa report that you prepared that shows the influence of ALEC in Iowa and among Iowa legislators on Iowa policy.
Thanks, Lisa. Joining us now, I believe we have on, Maddie, do we have Peter Fisher on the line? Peter Fisher, the research director of the Iowa Policy Project, is a nationally known expert on ALEC, and he has done some terrific work, including a report called "Selling Snake Oil to the States," which is a reference to ALEC's Rich States, Poor States, which they've published for, I believe, the last 6 years. Peter, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Great, thanks for joining us.
Oh, glad to be here.
Well, Peter, tell us a little bit about the research that you've done.
Well, I took a look at the ALEC sort of flagship report that they put out called the one that you mentioned about Rich States, Poor States, that alleges to provide a prescription for how states can achieve growth and prosperity. And they've put out 6 editions now, so I decided to take a look at how well their prescriptions have done in the last several years. So I took their first report, the 2005 edition, I believe it was, and said, let's see how well those states actually performed.
And how did they do?
Well, what we found was the states that adhered most closely to ALEC's agenda, their prescription for prosperity, actually did worse than the states that adhered least to those kinds of prescriptions. So instead of being a prescription for prosperity, it's rather the opposite.
Well, Peter Fisher's report, Selling Snake Oil to the States, is available on our website, progressiowa.org. It's also available on the Iowa Policy Project's website, iowapolicyproject.org. Peter, did I get that right, your
yes,
website?
Did.
Okay, great. We're going to go through, in that report, Peter identifies 5 myths, and probably more, but I found 5 myths that I found really interesting in the research that you've done about ALEC's policies versus actual reality, and sort of the policies that they promote and what the actual impact of those policies have been. So before we head to a commercial break, we'll go ahead and tackle the first myth right now. The first myth is that decreasing state and local taxes creates job growth. So ALEC would say that if you decrease taxes at the state and local level, that would spur economic growth and promote job growth. But you found that is not the case. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I've looked at research, and there's been a large body of it done carefully and well over the past 2 or 3 decades. And when you look at that legitimate, careful research, it actually shows that the effects of state and local taxes on state economic growth and jobs is very small. And you find an effect only by holding everything else constant, which means holding spending constant and having a state balanced budget. So, in fact, states have to balance their budgets, and if they're going to cut taxes, they've got to cut spending in some other area or raise someone else's taxes. So it's not clear that there is really a significant effect in the real world of cutting business taxes on state economic growth.
So what does increase economic growth and job growth if not decreasing taxes? You mentioned that the only way that it holds true is that if everything else remains the same, meaning does that mean that we need to invest in public infrastructure and public education and other services like that? Or what would your prescription be for job growth?
Well, sure. I mean, those basic functions of state and local governments, which is, as you say, providing education, that's the majority of budgets in most states, providing roads and water and sewer systems, the infrastructure that the economy depends on. Those things need to be done well and need to be adequately funded. And in fact, if you look at what really makes a difference over the long haul in state growth in incomes, which is what economic development policy ought to be about, it's the education level of the citizenry. So when we take money away from education, which we have been doing, particularly higher education for the past decade, we've been defunding it, forcing tuition up, reducing access to higher education, and using some of the money we saved instead to provide incentives to business. And states are really shooting themselves in the foot when they do that and undermining long-term prosperity for the state.
So for Peter Fisher's prescription for job growth would be increase education spending at the higher education level and increase increase the education level of our citizenry. Yeah,
and maintain funding of education at all levels. I mean, states have been cutting preschool funding. They've been laying off teachers, particularly in the last several years. Iowa less so than a lot of states, but that's a prescription for economic decline if you keep that up.
Well, the second myth I'd like to tackle is that lowering the top personal income tax rate is key to small business success. Now, you hear this in national arguments a lot, that when you increase taxes on the top earners, even by a small margin, we had this debate over the fiscal cliff at the end of last year, even by a small margin, if you increase that rate, that you're really hurting small business owners. What did you find when tackling this ALEC proposal?
Well, first of all, some of those so-called small business owners that would be affected by that are, in fact, small businesses because they're hedge fund managers who employ very few people or are self-employed, and they're making money hand over fist. Those are not the job creators. It's not small firms, it's new firms, it's innovation that creates jobs. If you focus on that, you realize right away that income taxes are the most friendly tax to a new business, because any new business that's starting up is going to be in a loss situation for, on average, several years. Well, the income tax isn't going to tax you at all then, but you're paying property and sales taxes. The income tax isn't going to kick in until you get off the ground, until your business becomes profitable, and even then you get to carry those early losses forward and reduce your tax bill. So, shifting away from the income tax to other revenue sources is harmful to new businesses and innovation, not helpful.
So that tax shift actually ends up hurting small businesses. So are you saying that in effect that the ALEC proposal would that the ALEC agenda would actually hurt small businesses more than slightly higher tax rates on the top personal earners?
Yeah, I'm quite certain it would. And, it reveals what their agenda is really about, which is not about growth. It's about attacking the progressivity of taxes at the state and local level, and about encouraging measures that basically accelerate the widening inequality that we've seen in American society for the last 30 years.
And actually, and you could probably speak to this much better than I can, we have seen reports in the last few days to the last week, especially since it's the 5-year anniversary of the economic, really the hardening of the economic meltdown of 2008. We've seen really stark statistics that have been published over the last week or so, that the income gap, the disparity between the richest and the poorest among us, is wider than it has ever been.
Yes, wider than it has been since just before the crash of 1929. Yes, I think that's right. And, the very top groups, because so much of their income is in the form of capital gains that get a huge tax preference, they took a hit in the recession, but they've actually recovered quite nicely, whereas the rest of the country is still struggling and hasn't seen an increase in median wages or median family income in a decade, and they're not recovering. It's the wealthy who actually have reaped all the gains over that period, and all the gains since the recovery began.
Well, and one of the other impacts on the wealthiest among us is in the third myth that I found in your report that I thought was very interesting. Myth number 3. That ALEC promotes the fact that high taxes, estate taxes, as you mentioned, or capital gains taxes, high taxes cause the richest among us to leave. So their argument would be that if you raise taxes in your state, the rich folks are going to move. But you found that not to be the case. Why was that?
Well, there's been a number of studies that that have looked at that, and you can use Internal Revenue Service data that shows incomes and where people live one year versus the next. It just doesn't happen to any significant degree or at all. There's other things that drive migration. New Jersey had a millionaire's tax for a while, and there were claims it was driving millionaires out of the state. It turned out to be kind of completely false. Most people actually don't move. Americans are a pretty stable group. And, when we looked at this in Iowa, of the few who moved, an awful lot of them moved a very short distance. An awful lot of them moved to places with a warmer climate, but often higher taxes. It's just a myth that tax policy is really driving migration to any degree.
So they may be fair weather about where they live, but it's not based. It's actually based on weather and not on tax policy.
Right.
Other than the weather, like what would cause someone to move? Just family reasons, personal reasons, or did you find any real explanation for why they move?
Well, sure. Family connection has a lot to do with it. Particularly if you're elderly, you aren't tied to a job. Job moves have a lot to do with it. Certainly, weather has a lot to do with it. But an irrational person looking at the situation, a differential in state and local taxes because one state has no income tax and the other doesn't, or the other has one, that isn't going to matter much. They got to raise money somewhere if they're going to provide you any services in that place you're planning on going to. And, why you might pay higher property taxes or sales taxes instead. And besides which, you want to go to a place where, the roads don't have potholes and where your kids or your grandkids are going to get a good education.
Well, and to build good roads and to build good schools, you need revenue. And
need revenue.
And the fourth myth that you identified, or that I saw in your research that was very interesting, is that tax cuts increase revenue. And we've heard this. This is the so-called Laffer curve, and Art Laffer has been noted as a right-wing economist since for the last several decades. And one of his big ideas was that if you decrease taxes, it will actually lead to an increase in revenue that comes into the government. But you found that wasn't the case.
Yeah, he's one of the authors of Rich States, Poor States, Arthur Laffer. So it's not a report to the so-called Laffer curve. But, he likes to put out this hypothetical curve and then say that's the way the real world looks. But in reality, he hasn't been able to identify any place where we're on the part of that curve where raising tax rates reduces revenue. And I don't know of any reputable economist who thinks that any of the tax cuts that anybody's talking about are actually going to increase revenue to a state.
Well, I believe that's what George H.W. Bush in the presidential campaign in 1980, running against Ronald Reagan, referred to as voodoo economics. Not even he believed it at the time.
That's right. Yeah.
The last myth I want to talk about is myth number 5, that wage suppression policies or so-called right-to-work laws actually create jobs. Would you throw minimum wage or the lack of an increase of a minimum wage in that mix as well?
Well, that's another debate that's been ongoing for quite a while, and there's been a lot of research on the effect of minimum wages on employment, and it's clear that the higher minimum wage raises incomes and has actually very little effect on employment. The same thing with right-to-work laws. What's clear is that the states that have adopted these so-called right-to-work laws have lower wages and benefits. It's not clear that policy has led to job growth. When you look at the situation control for all the other things that affect whether a state grows or not, as opposed to the typical ALEC method, which is to look at the top 10 states in this measure and the bottom 10 states and then assume all the differences have to do with whatever they're looking at. Income taxes, well, we don't control for anything else. It must be income taxes. Right to work laws, well, we're not going to consider what else might have made a state grow. But our simplistic little correlation says must be right to work.
We've been talking with Peter Fisher, the research director of the Iowa Policy Project, and about his report, Selling Snake Oil to the States, exposing some of ALEC's myths. That report is available at our website, progressiowa.org, as well as iowapolicyproject.org. Peter, thank you so much for joining us and for all of your work exposing ALEC's dangerous policies.
Well, thank you for letting me talk.
Up next, we'll have Senator Joe Bolcom on the line. State Senator Joe Bolcom is the chair of the Progressive States Network. Before that, we're going to go to a quick commercial break. Thanks to Fighting Burrito for sponsoring this segment of the show. Located in Ames and downtown Des Moines on 13th Street, just south of Locust, you'll find a great atmosphere, great staff, and a delicious lunch. Their belief is a good meal can prepare you to do great things, and a healthy meal is a great step toward a satisfied, focused mind. Fighting Burrito is proud to serve fresh ingredients from local vendors, and they care about this planet and work hard to be efficient and green. Join the fight today. And thanks to Dan Kelly in Newton, a versatile guy who is a legislator, real estate agent, and DJ. Who knew? Thanks to Story County vet Dr. Kim Holding. Dr. Holding has been treating critters of all kinds in Ames for more than 3 decades. Your pets will come home smiling. And again, thanks to Fighting Burrito for sponsoring this segment of the show.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
I'm Brian Leach, owner and general manager of Service Legends. I brought along a couple of the home comfort heroes.
Hi, I'm Tammy Wells.
I am Nick Wondershad.
I am administrative manager.
I am the senior technician
from Service Legends.
It seems like every good thing, when you feel it to the bone that it's good, there's a lot of hard work put behind it. I don't think that you can fake it and have it turn out good.
You know, if we seem like, okay, that's just weird, it's just a furnace, why would you believe so deeply in a furnace? It's not just that, you know, we want to show the world that you can have good service.
Yeah, I mean, it's your home.
You know, it's built into our daily trainings, it's built into our culture, that we're gonna do whatever it takes to have each client say they love us, period.
That's why we spend all the hours in the training that we do. And if we guarantee it's gonna be a good experience for you, or else it's free, what type of work do you think we're gonna do?
There is a guarantee.
Temperature selection guarantee, fixed right or it's free guarantee, comfort guarantee, best value guarantee. All of these guarantees hold us accountable to ensuring that we exceed your expectations. And if for whatever reason we'd fail and we can't make it right, we guarantee all of those guarantees with a 100% money back guarantee.
I mean, if you don't think that your technician can fix it right, are you gonna say that to a client? No.
You don't have to worry about having a technician come to your house.
We drug test, background check all of our team members. We put safe people in your home. Each and every one of our service techs, 400 hours a year in training.
You tell it the minute they walk in the door. They know what they're doing, they've done their homework, and they actually truly care about what you want.
Because at the end of the day, you're the person that makes sure I have a job.
They're gonna be listening. They're gonna wanna know what your challenges are. Then they're gonna come and give you options, and you get to choose.
If I'm there to help and I make it easy and painless, I did my job right that day.
Well, when it comes to your comfort, safety, and your family, you know, you don't necessarily go buy the most expensive, but you get the most bang for your buck.
Oh, it's worth it, because there's a lot of people that will find a way to get it to work right now and then leave and then come back, charge you again, and the cycle just repeats itself. So when I'm out there looking at the furnace, I want to find why it failed today. How can we change the part today with something that you're not going to have to worry about? Is it worth changing the part today? I mean, you can put a lot of money into a furnace. I can fix parts all day. There's good job security in that for me. But is it the right thing for you?
I get a lot of the phone calls of after the technicians are there. They're just in awe. They're like, wow, you guys are great. I mean, I don't even know what to say. You guys are great. Everything you did was perfect. It was great.
Keep going though. I like this.
Just give us a try. I'm gonna take all the risk.
I've got the time to make this right. I've got the support to make it right.
Just check us out.
And if you don't see the value in what we do,
I mean, fixed right or it's free or 100% money back.
enough said.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
And we're back. My name is Matt Sinovic, the Executive Director of Progress Iowa, sitting in for Ed Fallon, who is on his global tour. I guess he may be starting his March for Climate Change early. No, he's in Ireland, and he has asked me to guest host for a couple of days. We've been talking about ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, and their disastrous impact on public policy in Iowa and in state houses across the country. All of the information about today's show and the resources that I've been referencing and our guests have been referencing is available at progressiowa.org. There's a link that you can click that says, "Have you met ALEC?" And all of the videos and documentation can be found there. We've been talking with folks from the Center for Media and Democracy and the Iowa Policy Project, and on the line now is State Senator Joe Bolcom from Iowa City. Senator Bolcom, are you there?
Yes. Good afternoon, man. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Great. Thanks for joining us today. As you know, we've been discussing ALEC and their work around the country. Can you tell us, you have a front row seat to this in the Iowa legislature. Can you tell us how ALEC has impacted the debate over public policy in Des Moines?
Well, you know, ALEC is a group that first, it's a pleasure to be on the show. It's a pleasure to be on with Peter Fisher and Lisa Graves, two of my heroes in the progressive community. They've done just incredible work exposing how corporations work through the American Legislative Exchange Council to affect public policy focused on the states. And we know over a very long period of time, ALEC and their corporate sponsors have essentially tried to do a number of things that have impacted people's ability to make a decent living. You're talking with Peter. Working people's wages have stagnated. As the top 1% saw a 20% increase in their wealth last year, everybody else got about a 1% increase. And it's the kind of policies that ALEC pushes around the country that have really undermined America's middle class, and we see it every day here in Iowa. We have 400,000 people in our state that don't have enough food to eat. Basic issues like that are coming home to roost, and ALEC is really at the center of pushing regressive policies that are bad for families and bad for our middle class.
And it doesn't just end in the legislature. Governor Branstad, as I mentioned earlier, is a founding member of ALEC.
That's right.
And the entire, I believe, is the entire Iowa House of Representatives a member, or they're a member as a chamber? Is that? Do I have that right?
Yeah, I think that's how it goes. There are a number of national organizations that legislators belong to. There's the National Conference of State Legislatures, probably the biggest, and it's we pay dues as a state to them, and it's bipartisan. There's the Council of State Governments, also a very effective group where we go and learn about policy. And then there's ALEC, which is very conservative and corporate controlled. And then on the progressive side, the Progressive States Network, we pay dues to NCSL and Council of State Governments as a state. And I understand the Iowa House state taxpayers are paying for Iowa House members to all be members of ALEC, which seems to be a little over the top.
So
in terms of the use of state money to advance a corporate agenda.
So for some of our listeners out there, explain the difference between NCSL, the National Conference on State Legislatures, and CSG as compared to ALEC, and why those two organizations are different, that that they should get our tax dollars and ALEC should not.
Well, they have committees that have Republicans and Democrats on them, various standing committees on all the various policy areas. The executive branch also participates. As in the governor's office, they also participate. In staff is welcome to attend. There's voting that goes on about different state policy positions as we represent them to the federal government and to Congress. States have, want to make sure that Congress makes good decisions too. And they're bipartisan. I mean, you have equal number of Democrats and Republicans participating, and the agenda is determined by legislators. In the case of ALEC, the agenda is brought to the most conservative Republican legislators for the most part. There are a few conservative Democrats that participate, but the agenda is shaped by the corporate interests and basically handed off at their meetings to legislators that are supportive, and they come home and suddenly there's 25 states have introduced a very regressive bill that's bad for families and the middle class.
And almost identical bills.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the effective things about ALEC is they've been able to create a kind of a national narrative by getting legislators from 25 states all to introduce the same legislation. And, of course, then everybody's getting publicity and messaging around that kind of legislation, and it tends to amplify their effectiveness. And it's actually it's a quite elegant approach.
One of my favorite or most terrifying stories about ALEC is, I believe it was in Florida, where a state legislator introduced one of ALEC's model bills, and where it says, insert your state name here, they forgot to put Florida. They just left it as insert your state name. So we've been talking all day about ALEC's political agenda, their dangerous policies, and their influence in the State House. What can be done to prevent their influence here? Is there a legislative solution? Is it just a matter of citizen action? What would you recommend to those of us who want to stop their influence?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think over the last couple of years, as a result of ALEC Exposed and the great work of Lisa Graves and others, people are much more knowledgeable about ALEC. And so one of the first things it's important for us to do as policymakers is when bills get introduced that have come from the ALEC factory is to identify them as ALEC bills and to give them proper notice so that people know what we're dealing with, that this is a national effort that has lots of resources behind it, and work to make educate people that it's an ALEC bill and work to essentially defeat it where we can. But I think part of it is just the identification process. There's plenty of bad ideas that make their way into legislation, right? But when ALEC's behind them, it takes on a whole different era, and it's important, I think, for us to call it out when we see it and educate constituents that that's what we're dealing with, and bring people forward to fight it.
Well, I can trust that you'll be doing that, and there will be those of us there standing behind you. So thanks very much for your hard work, and thanks very much for joining us today on the show.
No problem, man. I appreciate the work, progress I was done on this issue. You've done some terrific work this last year to make people more aware, so appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Sure enough.
We've been talking with Senator Joe Bolcom of Iowa City, who's also the chair of the Progressive States Network, and discussing ALEC and their dangerous influence on public policy. That's our show for today. Tomorrow we'll be talking about voter ID, another dangerous ALEC policy. We'll be joined by guest Joe Glazebrook, an attorney for the ACLU and LULAC, Senator Tom Courtney of Burlington, Joe Henry, the state director of LULAC, and Bonnie Pitts, the president of the League of Women Voters of Iowa. Thanks very much to Hawk Restaurant for sponsoring this last segment of the show. If you've not yet visited Hawk, be sure to make plans to do so. Experience delicious, sustainable, farm-to-table dining in the historic East Village of Des Moines at East 5th and Walnut. The menu evolves almost daily and exists to showcase the finest of Iowa ingredients while supporting local farmers. Owners Suman and Cynthia Hawk believe the best meals begin with the best ingredients. That's why approximately 90% of their ingredients come from local farms. They are passionate about creating healthy, seasonal dishes with flavors from around the world. They're committed to what they do and think you'll taste the difference. Thanks to Diana's Wedding Cakes in Newton, who's actually Ed Fallon's mom, and not just for weddings. She also has cupcakes and cookies, all kinds of goodies, so call her for your special events needs. Thanks to Community CPA and Associates Incorporated, who are committed to providing professional accounting and tax services to their clients where the differences in cultures, social values, and business practices are well understood without prejudice and preconceived judgment. Thanks again to Hawk Restaurant for sponsoring this segment of the show. Thank you to Maddie Kane, who our producer for Webcast One Live, who has helped me get through my first show. And thanks again to our show sponsors, the Iowa chapter of the Sierra Club, Iowa Physicians for Social Responsibility, the Great March for Climate Action, and to all of our sponsors who help make this show possible. Thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow at noon to talk about voter ID and Secretary of State Matt Schultz.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.